question. Tell me about your book, Trump and the Jews. I am often asked by people, what do people in Israel, what do Jews living in Israel think of President Trump? Can you tell us a little bit about the reaction that the Jewish people in Israel have to this very improbable, very unlikely, very unpredictable president of the United States?
Well, certainly, President Trump is a fascinating individual because he he came to office in the background of being this seemingly crazy New Yorker from Queens,
Right.
from New York City, and that in and of itself is something very unique for a president of the United States. But New York is also a place where there are a lot of Jews, and so some of them tend to be very far in the liberal side of the spectrum,
Right.
and then there are others who mainly Orthodox Jews who are more right wing and more vote for the GOP. So it's fascinating, that in and of itself. Both Trump and the Jews are fascinating. So
Yeah.
having said that, I think it should be clear that the basic principle is that those Jews who are closely connected to their roots are going to be very strongly pro Trump, because you have two things that go together: being close to one's religious roots, if those roots are in Judeo-Christian civilization, Judaism or Christianity,
Hmm.
and if they're biblically based, they're going to also be close to a feeling for God and a connection with Israel. If you recall, the Democrats years ago, they had a real problem at their convention over two issues: God and Jerusalem,
Right.
that they one mentioned in their platform. So Trump is unique because he came to office with a very strong connection with the Jewish people, which is based on his background in New York and also strong family connections. And he came to office determined to change the rules of the game as it pertains to the Middle East and as it pertains to Israel. And he's done that from doing away with the nuclear deal with Iran, from moving the embassy to Jerusalem, where it should have been years ago. Uh,
Which, by the way, can we, and I know a lot of people make, those of us who support President Trump make a big deal of this, but it is a big deal. There were presidents who promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem over and over again, and it never happened. This is yet another promise made, promise fulfilled by by President Trump.
Absolutely. And there is no question that this is a central issue. Every single Jew around the world, not to mention Christians who are also biblically connected, but every Jew around the world celebrates a holiday called Passover.
Right.
And we have a festive meal on the first night of Passover in America, 2 nights, called the Seder. And at the end of that meal, when we remember how God brought us out of slavery in Egypt, and brought us into the land of Israel, we remember that, and we say at the end of the Seder, at the end of that festive meal, we say, and in fact we sing it, if you know the melody,
Hmm.
we sing "Next Year in Jerusalem."
Next year,
It's something
Jerusalem.
that is,
Yeah.
it's always been central to the Jewish people.
It's a huge. It's just. It's such a monumental accomplishment, and I just want to make sure that we reiterate why it is such a big deal. But let's go back now. Let's go to Saudi Arabia. Our intelligence suggests that the crown prince was involved. The president's position is very clear. We need Saudi Arabia. It's a key ally, particularly with our relationship, the world's relationship with Iran. It is not a black and white, easy to understand issue. Here's one thing I keep coming back to. If Saudi Arabia ordered the execution of this guy, and of course it's barbaric and it's brutal, but I also know that, for example, China routinely kills its citizens. There are countries all over the world that kill their own people. we're not going to stop doing business with China. I'm getting a lot of listeners to my show who say, listen, it's an awful thing whether Saudi Arabia is cutting people's hands off for shoplifting or stoning women to death for adultery. There are some barbaric things that happen in other parts of the world, but does that mean we ought to upend our economy and sort of reshuffle our alliance with a nation like Saudi Arabia over this? And the president is very clear we should not. He's holding firm and supporting Saudi Arabia. And Mayor David Rubin, former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, you say that's the right position to take.
Well, I do. In my book, Trump and the Jews, I also described some other presidents. I described a president named Jimmy Carter, who basically abandoned an ally, which was the Shah of Iran.
Shah of Iran, right?
And he was a ruler. He was a ruler in the Middle East tradition of being a ruthless leader.
Brutal, right?
Yeah, that's just the way it is. But the reality is that he abandoned him. Obama abandoned Hosni Mubarak in Egypt for the same reason, because he felt, well, maybe he's not being peaceful enough towards his, and reaching out enough to his enemies. But the reality in the Middle East is that rulers are brutal, and the only country you're going to have any relationship with is Israel, if you're going to make that standard. Look, the world is not a pleasant place. We live in a tough neighborhood. As I always say, I grew up in a place called Brooklyn, which was a very tough neighborhood.
Right.
But I've been in Israel 27 years, and I found that the Middle East is an even tougher neighborhood. And the world, in fact, is a very tough place. And if you want to have allies in the world, you want to have cooperation, sometimes you have to work with people who don't share your values. So the basic principle has to be project American values, or in our case, project Israeli values, but project values of the free world and protect American interests. Because you can say what you believe in, and you should say what you believe in, but at the same time, you have to look after your interests.
And yet there are key Republicans who are lashing out against the president's position, notably Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Marco Rubio of Florida. Senator Rubio took to Twitter and said that human rights violations lead to mass migration, help extremism flourish, and often result in new governments hostile towards the U.S. because we supported their oppressors. Lindsey Graham said he didn't believe it's in the country's national security interests to look the other way when it comes to the brutal murder of Khashoggi. Graham said, I firmly believe there will be strong bipartisan support for serious sanctions against Saudi Arabia. He said, while Saudi Arabia is a strategic ally, the behavior of the crown prince in multiple ways has shown disrespect for the relationship and made him, in my view, beyond toxic. Are Rubio and Graham wrong on this, Mayor Rubin?
Yes, Rubio and Graham are good people with good intentions, but they're mistaken. They're going to hurt American interests. Yes, you speak out. Again, you speak out about your values. You make it clear what your values are. And I think President Trump punishing and extending sanctions towards those people who are found clearly to be involved in that crime, I think that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the Crown Prince, there is no definitive evidence, and if they find that there's definitive evidence, then decisions have to be made. But the truth is that Iran is a much greater threat to the United States than Saudi Arabia is, and than the Crown Prince is. Much greater threat.
Right.
They chant every day, death to America, death to Israel. And they don't just chant it. They are acting through terrorist organizations, through every Islamic terrorist organization in the Middle East, which they are funding heavily, the Hezbollah, the Hamas, the Fatah. All the terrorist organizations are receiving heavy funding from the Iranians. and so it's really one or the other. You have to make a decision.
Yeah, you
Saudi
make a
Arabia is working together with Israel, with the United States, to combat the Iranian threat to the free world. Are Senators Rubio and Graham going to stand up to that threat?
right. Right. Well, and again, go back to history. I love the hypocrisy of the left and Democrats, and I guess some Republicans who seem to forget, as you pointed out, Jimmy Carter abandoned the Shah. We got the Ayatollah. We got the Islamic Revolution, and more recently, let's not forget how Barack Obama abandoned Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, and along came the Muslim Brotherhood. So,
Correct.
we could be in a whole world of hurt if we abandon Saudi Arabia.
That's right. And that's a basic lesson in foreign policy that needs to be understood.
Yeah.
Israel has always uh, worked with those who are willing to work with us,
Yep.
and you have to prioritize in foreign policy. You have to say, okay, what is my main goal? Okay, the main goal is to stop the Iranian nuclear threat. So yes, I will cooperate with those who don't necessarily share my values in order to combat that threat. That's what real leadership is about, and that's what President Trump is showing in these past few days and how he's responding to it.
I'm looking forward to getting your book, Trump and the Jews. The author has been our guest, David Rubin, the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. Mayor Rubin, thanks so much for spending some time with us. Keep fighting the good fight. All the best.
You're welcome. Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate you joining us. 12 minutes before the hour, portions of our show brought to you by the one and only My Pillow. And do I have, everybody is going to want